Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So there's two main ways we can look at mourning and the comfort. There's the easiest way, just thinking about mourning a family member. So I lost my father last year, and so if I couldn't be aware and work through those emotional states, I can't work to the next step of being comforted, especially through God and His embrace. What would be another tie into that?
Yeah, so one thing I would just want to acknowledge as a society is that I read this book recently called The Grieving Brain. I think I told you about it before.
Oh, yeah.
And as I was reading it, it talks about the neuroscience about the brain and how the brain works when we're mourning, and in terms of how those relationships we have that we lose and how that plays out. And so when we face tragedy, like a death, it has a significant impact on us, and it's more severe if it's a very close relationship that we've invested a lot with. There's a loss there. And as I was reading the book and how people respond to grief, or respond to tragedy, when they should grieve, they respond other ways. And as I was reading these different descriptions, I just thought, wow, our society has a lot of grief that it has not dealt with.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've got this debt of grief. I think a lot of it has to do with 2020 and everything that unfolded in our society, and with the pandemic and the social unrest and then the political unrest. And but I think it even precedes that, even to 9/11 to some degree, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
And so
even before that, we haven't even worked through the grieving of slavery.
Yeah, because you have to accept, acceptance, right?
Yeah.
So we have to understand it, appreciate it, accept it, and then grieve it. And as a society, and when we don't do those things, then we channel it out into other outlets that might include contempt and anger and hostile action,
acting out,
and even in some cases extreme violence.
Yeah.
So as a society, we have a lot of grief, and so we're making the tragedy worse by not grieving, and we're not getting the comfort we need because we're not grieving.
Yeah.
And God's saying, hey, those of you that are following me, those of you that stop resisting the grief, accept it. But I think there is, some of the recent conversations I've seen on my own social media is around this form of masculinity that is sort of anti-grieving. Men don't cry.
Like
men.
what parents are.
That's a woman thing.
Yeah.
There's this sort of superiority of the masculine over the feminine.
Yeah.
And grieving and crying tends to be more associated with women and the emotional. But both men and women are emotional. Both men and women need to grieve.
Yeah.
And so maybe easier for a woman to do it, but it would be courageous for a man to do it as well. They just culturally are going to have those stigmas that they've got to overcome.
Yeah, by all intents, if we met Jesus today, our culture would call him a little girl in our culture.
Yeah.
He cried. He was very emotional when people got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And
when we deny that, we're kind of shaping Jesus and the image we want him to be versus the image he truly is.
Yeah. Like a macho wrestler or something.
Yeah.
Randy Savage is on the scene.
And in Revelation, there's a description of Jesus that's very warrior-like and powerful, and that's the one that men tend to like that more than the weeping Jesus.
Yeah. Although it's still going to be very graceful.
Yeah.
As we understand him to be.
Yeah.
He's coming in as a warrior only after offering an obnoxious amount of grace.
Yeah.
Like, let's be real. Like, we don't deserve any of it.
Yeah, that's the end game.
It's the end game. It's like, you had all the chances in the world, homie.
Yeah. I think the opposite of mourning is rejoicing. So, with your father dying, mourning is a good thing.
Yeah.
But if your friend comes over and like, hey, let's celebrate, your dad died, like that would be horrible,
Yeah.
you know.
Another not so opposite, but still painful would be numbing, right?
Yeah.
Not acknowledging it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Burying
just,
it.
moving on to the rest of my life like it never happened. Like that's
Yeah.
almost equally as, hey, we want to celebrate this.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a good point. I mean, when I moved to Atlanta in 2005, it was hard. It was first, we got married, moved across the country, left everything we knew. Me and my wife were very different in many ways. Came up from different backgrounds, different personalities. We were just the opposite in almost every possible way, and so it was very hard. Living away from home was hard. Life just beat us up, and so I ended up launching a marketing company, and this was kind of after the toxic mentors and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But when I ended up shutting down my marketing company, it was like all the emotion that I hadn't processed in my first 8-9 years in Atlanta, it now was coming out of me, you know. And so that's the thing about grief is it will come.
Yeah.
You can't stop it, but if you wait, it's going to kind of brew, or it's going to be like a volcano where it kind of collects and collects, and then it'll blow up, and then it'll cause all kinds of consequences. Whereas if we just grieve in real time, then we get it out of us, we process it, it just makes a difference.
Mitigation strategy.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a big proponent of therapy right now.
Yeah.
Last, I don't know, 9 years. I've probably done over 50 sessions with different types of therapists, maybe like 3 different types.
Yeah.
But it's helped to mitigate those volcano moments, which could cause a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Especially in family, because, just think about it. If you are a volcano, you're going to do some things that you won't be talked to for like 10 years.
Yeah.
That's painful.
Mm-hmm.
I've hurt my family members like that.
Yeah.
And I've still to this day had to work through some of the stuff I've done.
Yeah.
So there's a big value to the mourning, being real with it,
Mm-hmm.
and being comforted, especially by God coming out of that. We can't even really see God if we are almost kind of in a constant state of mourning, because there's so much pain going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be in denial of that, and to just kind of think about even just society, like, they're just fine. They'll just pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah.
Be fine. Everything. Slavery didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I did my successful life. Any person could do their successful life. It's all just fine. Like, that is such a sweeping under the rug for a future volcano moment.
Yeah, and it's there's a lot of tragedy, and with social subject to see so much of it in a short amount of time, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, so that's 2 years ago. There's it's a horrifying event that's unfolded there, and we can kind of like intellectualize it, where it's this thing that's happening, but it's we sort of disconnected from the humanity layer of it. But there's been 3 or 4, I think, a video, a couple of videos, and a couple of pictures that I saw where it was like, okay, this kind of the emotional connect. There was emotional connection to go, wow, this is horrifying, and feeling it the way that they probably feel it every day, feeling it for a moment, and so. And that's could be in a local community where some tragedy is happening or happened, and it just breaks our heart. And I think that's kind of in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ is overcome with anxiety and to the point of sweating blood. I think in a sense he's feeling that tragedy, and possibly even Satan is running a reel of those things, to him. So
drinking that cup, of pain for us.
Yeah.
It brings me back to the first Beatitude a little bit. It makes me think of how I grieve for people that can't see God, because if you think about it, the only outlets are not really all that healthy. And God, if we truly understand God and His Word, it brings a lot of comfort. It brings almost like we could gather at His feet and hold His leg like a child and say, he'll say everything's going to be okay. Tragedy is a part of life, but I am still here, and I can still make your life better. I can bring comfort to your life, even though it may not be an ideal situation right now. Like Apostle Paul had many tragic situations in his life. He was homeless a lot of the time, but he was like nothing could rob him of his joy.
Yeah.
And still he had a tent making business, even though he was this amazing apostle. Like, imagine you don't have anything to really hold on to right now in life. That is a scary place to be.
Yeah, I think that's actually, and I think it's where a lot of people are.
Yeah.
It's kind of a nihilistic, this sort of despair and darkness, the abyss.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, I think in many ways, that's why people are turning to politics, is because it's kind of filling that religious impulse that they've maybe lost or walked away from. And they need, and they replace it with something. But that something can't really replace it in a way that addresses some of these deep issues.
Yeah, we're just trying to fill in the cubes and the shapes.
I mean, if I'm going to idolize Trump or any politician, I mean, he's not going to fill that void in my heart. He's just going to make it worse. And so,
to bring it to another little detour, real quick, I heard of a story through somebody very close to me. They were in a business transaction of sorts. They were doing a tour of an apartment, and this person said that he got into the LGBT world because he was just an emotional guy. Mm-hmm. And his parents, all his family, all his friends would tell him, well, you're just soft, so you're probably that.
Got it, yeah.
So
they label them a certain way, yeah.
LGBT world because almost like a peer influence.
Yeah.
Instead of, this is how Jesus was too. Like, this is natural, it's emotional. Even King David would get super emotional. So it's kind of also we're skewing into trying to fill these gaps with other things that are not necessarily the right things.
Yeah, and I would say there's a lot of examples of that where people are directed towards certain explanations or groups or solutions that are highly problematic because they're misunderstanding what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think that can happen with masculinity, femininity, or everything.
Career.
Yeah, like you must be you're not creative. It could be simple as that, like somebody thinking they can't draw because they've been told they're not creative. Mm-hmm. That's a simple version, but it's sort of this identity based understanding, and that's where I think our identity first and foremost needs to come as a child of God, is how as who we are based on who He made us to be and how He sees us, and then all other identities can kind of tentacle out from that.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that brings in the self, being able to really hunker down on self-identity versus what somebody else has dictated.
Yeah.
In this case, this gentleman thought that he belonged in that world because of how he was, versus maybe doing some research on a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Perhaps one of them could be the Bible. It's not my place to dictate he just belongs or doesn't belong in that world, but he could further his identity through researching.
Well, and that's part of the idea of belonging. So there's belonging, and then the opposite is alienation, right? And so if you're put in a group, like in this case, this guy is part of this group, and they're kind of have this superiority to his emotions. So they look down upon him and they push him to another group.
Rejection.
But if you find belonging in a group, you become part of that group, and you adopt the values of that group. And so, and so that's a dynamic we have to be aware of as well.
Yeah. And I mentioned rejection because it is a tie-in to mourning that we also, as a society, don't really accept or are growing not to accept. Like I hear stories about men taking it very personally when a woman rejects them now, instead of going back home and mourning it and figuring out what could I do better next time.
Yeah.
It's all like, well, she was stupid.
Yeah, it's blaming her instead of taking responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's a missed opportunity. But, rejection, just being an entrepreneur, it's like, okay, you got to learn how to be rejected 100 times before you get a yes, because that's part of the journey.
Yeah, working through that is
and
a
you
sense
got to
of
work,
mourning.
and working through your insecurities. And some people have a harder time with it. No, there's a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I think about the two candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, I can't think of an instance where I've ever heard about Trump mourning or him mourning in any public setting. But just based on who he is and how he operates, it seems like that would be the last thing he would ever be caught doing, would be crying, because he's a strong man that wants to present strength, and mourning is weakness, I think. So when Trump's New York trial was unfolding, there was a moment where Hope Hicks was testifying just about some of the terrible things that Trump was, and just how he ran his business. And she broke down and cried in the middle of the courtroom. That's the closest thing I can think of to Trump. With Kamala Harris, I know some of the stories she shared just about her upbringing and her mom. There's some videos of her getting emotional on camera, if I remember right. But I don't know. She's very emotional. Joy is like a big one that she's leaned into, and she's been mocked for her laugh and her joy. Mm-hmm. I know that's not mourning, but I don't know her well enough to really.
Maybe it's on the opposite side of that, comforting.
The comforting, yeah. So.
So for her to even get to comfort, she's worked through some. Well, in theory, have worked through some mourning.
So that would be an area of something to learn more about her in terms of how that has unfolded. That part of her has unfolded.
Yeah.
And maybe that'd be something to look up with Trump. Has Trump ever cried?
Probably not.
Has he ever been vulnerable?
Because that would be against his masculinity.
Yeah.
It looks like Kamala has mourned for child abuse victims.
Yeah.
And prosecuted them too. So.
Yeah, because there's the story she shares, and that's one of the one times I think she has cried on camera is just her friend. She became a prosecutor because her friend was being molested by a stepfather or something. And she told her friend, like, you come to our house and live with us. Yeah. So this friend came in. So she shares that and gets emotional. So that was one part of what inspired her to go into the type of work that she went into. So
when I think of mourning for Trump, it's really difficult. So I have to think of skewed examples.
Yeah.
For the January 6th people that tore into the Capitol, he kind of celebrated them, even though they're essentially criminals that killed police officers, injured police officers. But in a skewed way, he mourned them. He wants them to get out too. He has announced he wants to pardon them. But again, very skewed because they did wrong and they should be facing consequences for that.
When he has his sort of regrets or things that he thinks are injustices, they're usually injustices. Like, they're injustices, and he's thinking the injustice is unjust.
Yeah. He really should be mourning the police officers instead of the criminals that killed them.
But for him, those are the people that stormed the Capitol are his loyalists. Those are the people that love him, as he says. They're so lovely people. Yeah. And he thinks they're being treated horribly. And I think, the opposite of mourning is rejoicing. And I think if you think about mourning or rejoicing in sin, it feels more like Trump is rejoicing in their sin. And has flipped it in a way where he's mourning them, but it's really a rejoicing of their sin in a twisted kind of way. Even in his reaction to it too, where he took a long time to even say anything, and then when he did say something, it was very lax. Yeah, like, hey, just disperse or something like that, right? Well, he took it was like 3 hours and 45 minutes, if I remember right, before he told him to leave. Um, he, at one point, he posted kind of blaming Pence, and then he did another post that said, "Stay peaceful." But he didn't tell him to leave until like 3 hours. And then after Ashley Babbitt was shot, he waited 45 minutes before he told him to leave.
Is that one of the officers?
No, that was the civilian that was shot
okay.
by one of the security agents because she crossed the barrier.
Okay.
And so, but he sat there for 45 minutes before he told him to leave. So it was, it was pretty bad. But if he were to mourn that, I think he's valorized it because he's rejecting the comfort he could have if he accepted responsibility, mourned it, and took responsibility.
He's using it to rally people instead. Towards violence or towards votes.
Because he's essentially saying, "I want it to happen again."
Yeah.
Right. If I punch you, and I don't acknowledge it, and I don't apologize, and I don't take responsibility, I'm saying there was nothing wrong with me punching you, which means I can punch you again. Yeah.
And he's reiterated that by denying or declining that he will accept a clean transition again.
Yeah. So we're going through this. Now we're going through the sequel. And the sequels are usually bigger than the prequels, than the first movie. Yeah. So.
Sadly. So, in terms of Kamala, we covered the child abuse mourning, I think. And recognizing also the president's decision. I guess that was a sense of a little bit of mourning that he decided to step down instead of rejoicing, like, "Ha! I got the upper hand here." Like Trump likely would have done. She was like, and everybody around her was like, "This is a hero that really put himself down, even though technically he probably didn't even have to." And celebrating that, comforting him, because I'm sure he's mourning his loss of his dream of another term. So not a direct time, but I think it's very...
Yeah, he has to let it go, which is the opposite of, 2020 Trump lost and he wouldn't let it go. And here we have Biden who is letting it go.
Yeah.
And he's letting this thing go so that someone else has an opportunity. And I don't know if there is I haven't seen anything with Biden that sort of indicated the mourning layer of it. But yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it or think about it.
What are some policies that she is also, I guess in terms of direct action to mourning, she's also been able to pass policy around limiting drug prices like insulin to $35. So she's mourned that people could be charged excessively, but there's no control on it.
Yeah. So when we see tragedy and then, acceptance, grieving it, I think the thing that strikes me or that comes through for me with her is the mourning is the mourning I have for our country, for my party, the Republican Party, like mourning just how much it's fallen, like how much the Republican Party has lost its way, how much America has become so divided, and how much America has become so polarized. And then her having this message of bringing people from different groups and walks of life, a very disparate coalition, and bringing that kind of like I texted you, like her speech in the Democratic convention just seemed more like Reagan's spirit of freedom and possibility and hope. It just seemed wild to see this type of patriotism in the Democratic convention. So for me, that grief of our society and kind of seeing, okay, I was hoping for this, but I expected it to look a different way, and now I'm seeing it, and it looks a little different, and it's in a different place than I was expecting, but it's kind of what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a way to... I think sometimes we don't grieve until we experience the vision of what we've hoped for and what we've lost.
Yeah. And I think as we start to wrap up here, because I know you got to go, is grieving for others. Like another policy she wants to implement is balancing out like what a teacher gets paid or charges and taxes versus a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Like balancing that out. Like somebody that empathizes with the teacher or the lower income person wanting to get a hand up in life.
Yeah.
That is, a sign of mourning for somebody else.
Yeah.
Mourning their loss.
Yeah. And I think, and even in the convention, that she had people share their stories, and there was a lot of emotion and crying, and with family members or people who'd gone through tragedies. And if there's an area that she's not mourning, it may be on the issue of abortion. Yes, you're helping to share the story and the mourning of the women that have suffered because of some of the archaic laws and restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what about the babies that we want them to experience life as well? Mm-hmm. So there could be, that's something to explore more.
More perspective there for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Catch y'all in the next Beatitude. Thanks for watching.